guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Tanya. This is Cody. He's already being very annoying and he's going to join me for this video. This is going to be a reaction video today to Lost in the Pond. He just uploaded this video 2 days ago called 7 Ways British and American Elections Are Very Different. I'm somebody who is not at all interested in politics. So I'm not interested in that aspect of it, but it would be kind of interesting to see how different elections are, just because I know that the UK does it very, very differently than the US, and a lot of places do it very differently than the US. So I'm just purely interested in seeing how different it really is. And from what I heard, Australia, their elections are similar to the UK also. So let's go ahead and just get right on into this video, get it started. Okay, here we go.
Hello. You may remember that back on America's Independence Day, my home country of the United Kingdom went to the polls in the country's most recent general election. And later this year, on the UK's Guy Fawkes Night, Americans, including yours truly, are set to do the same. And so, because this year's presidential election marks my first since becoming a US citizen, I thought now would be the perfect time to discuss all the ways British and American general elections are very different. Throughout, I'll be using words like Democrat, Republican, Labour, Conservative, names that should bring about unbridled harmony in the comments section. And I should hope so too, because later on there's going to be a very silly end to this video that should unify all of us from now until the end of time. And so, just as millions are set to cast their vote in November, why not help me reach 1 million subscribers? If you've not yet become one yourself, do that now! In the meantime, here's how UK and US elections are completely and utterly a little bit different. In order that the messaging of this video not get lost in the pond, it's absolutely crucial that we start with a vocab lesson. Because just like all other facets of life, Britain and America do differ on their election terminology. For instance, if you've ever seen BBC election coverage, you might have heard the term swingometer. A swingometer is a news graphic highlighting the impact of swing voters.
I'll be honest, I have not heard this term, but I also don't watch any British politics, but I also don't watch any American politics either. Like I said, I'm not interested whatsoever in politics as like, you know, just in general, I'm not interested in it. Oh my God. I care about my country and I care about having the right people in office and all of those sorts of things, but just the topic of politics is just such a headache to most people, I would say. So yeah, I don't watch any type of politics.
That is, voters who have switched allegiance to another party. Given America's love of election graphics, you could quite see the swingometer taking off here, especially in light of the American concept of swing states. These are states that are so tightly contested they could conceivably flip in favour of the other party. The nearest equivalent in parliamentary UK politics are swing seats, which are seats that swing, but more on seats in a minute. Meanwhile, with both countries so polarised, it can be quite difficult to cut through political bias in the news. However, thankfully for me, no such memo is lost in the pond thanks to today's sponsor, Ground News. To extraterrestrials only half listening to Earth radio waves, it might sound like the sole purpose of general elections is to elect a president or prime minister. After all, the overwhelming emphasis is on our national candidates. But this doesn't tell the whole story. One often overlooked difference between UK and US elections is that US voters get to select their presidential candidate at the ballot box. Back in the UK, we don't actually vote for prime minister. Instead, we vote for our local member of parliament, more commonly known as an MP. He or she is elected to lead a parliamentary constituency of which 650 make up the UK. That means there are 650 MPs. On July 4th, the Labour Party secured a majority of them and thus formed a government. And since Keir Starmer was party leader, he got to be Prime Minister and live in this modest flat in London. But it gets confusing because
that is confusing. So that's so weird.
PM is also an MP. You see, while most of the country technically didn't vote for or against Sunak or Starmer, voters in their local constituencies did. Of course, many will vote for the party of their preferred Prime Minister in an effort to elect them into office. This November, I get to vote for arguably America's nearest MP equivalent, members of Congress. But Congress is a different branch of government to the one inhabited by El Presidente, so the party that forms a House majority does not by default enter the White House. This is why Americans also vote for president on the same day. For newbies, this is where it gets confusing. You see, at first, I couldn't wrap my head around the Electoral College, partly because I spent 4 years thinking it was an Ivy League school. But it turns out that the Electoral College is how the president gets elected.
Yeah.
Each state gets a certain number of electoral votes. How are these determined, Lawrence? I was just getting to that. The number of electoral votes is equal to the number of senators and persons within that state. So, my home state of Illinois has 2 senators and 17 members of Congress. Therefore, in Illinois, 19 electoral votes are up for grabs. Although Illinois, unlike Wisconsin and Michigan to the north, is not a swing state. That said,
in case you're new to my channel, I'm also from Illinois, so that would go for me as well.
whoever gets the most votes within a particular state takes all of that state's electoral votes. Whichever presidential candidate carries the most of these across all states gets to be president. The United States remains the only country on Earth to elect an executive president in this way, with other countries having long since done away with the idea.
I honestly, I don't know how many people feel this way, but I think we should too. I understand the reason for it, but I also don't like it. I think it's kind of, I don't know. I'm not for it personally.
Anyways, US presidential elections are a lot like the Olympics. Millions tune in from around the world, flags are waved in abundance, and each one is 4 years in the making. Easy. In the UK, the routine isn't quite so steady and predictable. Or routine. I mean, sure, by law, general elections must take place no more than 5 years after the previous one. But despite that, the UK has actually had more general elections since the year 2000 than the United States. In fact, we've had 3 in the last 7 years alone. So why is that? Simple. Snap elections. Snap elections are elections that are called by the sitting Prime Minister earlier than the scheduled 5-year date. These are typically done in situations where the Prime Minister wants to bolster his or her party's majority or seek a mandate from the UK voters to pursue a particular issue. In the US, where the 4-year timeline is set in the Constitution, snap elections don't exist at the presidential level. Even when a president resigns or dies in office, there's no special election to replace him because the vice president immediately ascends to the Oval Office. By law, presidential elections are also held on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So, barring a radical overhaul of the US Constitution, we can comfortably predict the precise date of all future presidential elections from now until the end of time. Oh, and speaking of time, one of the most notable differences between UK and US...
At the time that I'm filming this, we're in the very last week of August of 2024, so very close.
Elections is how long they last. In the UK, this year's election season was over in just 43 days, but it might come as a surprise to some that this was considered by several British news outlets to be, quote, long. By some, I chiefly mean Americans, because the 2024 presidential election has been going on since about 1788. And while that might sound like British sarcasm, election season on this side of the pond does feel like it starts when the previous one ends. In reality, the first...
That's making me dizzy. Does that make anybody else dizzy?
It'd start to emerge about 2 years before Election Day, which is still a long time. In that time, you could have had 2 kids, or got an associate's degree, or lived under 4 UK prime ministers. Partly, the extreme length of US elections is due to the existence of primaries and caucuses, in which states vote to nominate a presidential candidate for both of the major parties. In Britain, those candidates, otherwise known as party leaders, are elected by party members months, often years, before a general election is even called. Therefore, the concept of primaries doesn't exist in the UK, unless we're talking about what Americans call elementary schools. As we've seen, the campaign trail in America is long in terms of time, but also in terms of distance. Leading candidates have to win over significantly more people across a much larger landmass than their equivalents in the UK. This partly is why campaign spending is so high in the United States, but it's by no means the only reason. Two terms that I hear a lot during US election cycles are PACs and super PACs. And while those might sound like computer game characters from the 80s, a PAC is a political action committee. The major parties pull in millions of dollars from PACs and super PACs, with much of it going to advertising campaigns in the aforementioned swing states. In the UK, such vast expenditure would not only be unnecessary, it would actually be illegal. And that's because the UK's Electoral Commission imposes stricter rules over campaign spending than the US. Individual candidates can spend a fixed amount of £11,390, plus either 8 pence or 12 pence per voter, depending on the constituency. The UK also has stricter rules around television advertising, in that it doesn't actually allow it. Following the passage of the 2003 Communications Act, political advertising on TV and radio is prohibited. Not so in the US, where election season brings out a litany of ads, often with menacing narration and soundtrack, attacking the other candidate. That said, there is one televisual event that the UK borrowed from the US: debates. 50 years after America's first...
It's very, to me it seems very juvenile the way they do it here with the whole, you can just kind of attack each other on TV, and I don't know. It's like, I don't know. If they didn't act like children so much, it maybe wouldn't be such a big deal. But a lot of times they just act like children, come in after each other, and they care more about that than actually helping the citizens of the country, it seems like sometimes.
Televised oratory showdown between John F. Kennedy...
And I don't mean anyone in particular. I just mean like all politicians, like in general. They're all very like that.
And Richard Nixon. The UK had its first in 2010, airing one at every election since. Meanwhile, during my 16 years in the US, I've often had late-night chats with disillusioned voters frustrated at the country's two-party system. After all, in a country that boasts more than 40 flavors of Coca-Cola, you'd think the US would offer more electoral options than most. And actually, one look at the election results of 2020 offers a reminder that other parties do exist. Most prominently, these include the Libertarian and Green parties. However, between them, the two carried less than 1.5% of the popular vote. In the UK, where those same gripes about two-party politics often arise, other parties do nonetheless fare relatively well. For example, in July's election, several seats were picked up by the Liberal Democrats and, what do you know, the Green Party. In fact, as of that election, 13 different parties are represented in the House of Commons. Compare this to the US House of Representatives, in which the duopoly of Democrats and Republicans is only rarely supplemented by an independent or two. And for me, the most unfortunate part is that Americans don't routinely get to see their elected officials forced into photo ops with wacky novelty candidates like former Prime Minister Theresa May was. It would immeasurably improve US politics. I mean, imagine your favourite candidate learning of his or her fate standing next to Elmo. Because that also happened to Theresa May and Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. I swear, this is not what British people mean when they talk about the Muppets in Parliament. But, speaking of people, that brings us on to this. Back in the late 90s, when I first became politically aware, I distinctly remember a question coming up in a UK chat room, and it was this: why do so few Americans vote? At the time, this question was not without merit. Back then, the UK was going through this weird phase in which 75% of its people actually turned up to the ballot box. And it was through that lens that we asked the question, because we'd heard that US voter turnout was in the low 50s. And so we got all British about it and just chalked it up to American apathy. Well, the 90s came to an end, and for reasons that I won't get into here, turnout at UK general elections fell dramatically. Despite somewhat recovering in the 2010s, the last 3 elections have all provided diminishing returns. Meanwhile, since those chat room observations of the past, US turnout has generally been on the up, to the extent that 2020's was the highest since 1900. Moreover, it was 7% higher than turnout for this year's election in the UK. How times have changed, though not quite as much as me, apparently. Anyway, as promised, here it is. A silly end to this video. Anybody who's watched this channel on a regular basis will know that I have a particular interest in the English language. And this got my producers, which is my wife, asking me, what is your favourite linguistic fact about presidential elections, Lawrence? And after thinking long and hard about it, I arrived at this. The US has never elected a president whose first or last names start with an S. And that's amazing, especially since S is one of the most common letters used at the start of last names in the country. It's also highly common among first names. This is reflected in the fact that 5 major presidential nominees had last names beginning with S. Winfield Scott, Horatio Seymour, Al Smith, Adlai Stevenson II, and Adlai Stevenson II again. And 2 whose first names did the same, Strom Thurmond and Samuel J. Tilden. And there's a reason most of us don't remember their names, because history tends to forget the losers. And sure, the experts will point out that Grover Cleveland, who was president twice, was actually born Stephen Cleveland, so your observations are rubbish, mate. Well, firstly, Stephen Cleveland sounds more like a comedy detective than a president. And secondly, there's a reason that he changed it. He'd presumably looked at the same list that I did. I mean, in the UK, not only have our 2 most recent prime ministers had S names, but also 9 of their predecessors. So that just leaves me with one question. Are Americans just more suspicious of the letter S? And if so, is that because they're more likely to see an actual snake in real life? That's 2 questions. Anyway, thanks for watching. Keep it civil in the comments. And since elections are all about numbers, I did a video looking at the ways in which Britain and America use numbers very differently. You'll watch that next. Until the next video, goodbye.
Well, there we have it. There's that video. Yeah, I mean, it seems like kind of there's no similarities really between the elections. Like everything about it is very, very different. But yeah, it was interesting though. Like I said, I'm not interested in politics. I'm not interested in any of this stuff on like a general level. But I do like to learn like little, things like this, especially when it is an election year and it is about to happen in a few months. So I thought I'd check this out and see what I can learn from it. But to be completely honest, whether it's American elections, British elections, I don't care where it's at, what it's for, they're all very confusing to me. It's such a boring topic to me. The older you get, you learn more and more. The older you get, you hear things and you see more elections, over time and stuff, and you learn how things work a little bit more. But yeah, it is interesting the differences between how we elect people. So anyway, I hope you guys all found this video interesting too. If you would like to see more Lost in the Pond, let me know in the comments below and I will do some more. He did a video that I haven't watched yet. It was 4 weeks ago and that was his last video before the one I just reacted to. For some reason, he took some time off. I don't ever notice him doing stuff like that. He must have like gone on vacation, but it's called Why Are Americans So Obsessed with Ice Cubes? So I thought that one might be kind of funny to watch too, just because I guess some Americans are obsessed with ice cubes, but not everybody is. So I think that sounds like a very interesting video to watch. So if you'd like to watch that one, if you'd like me to react to that one, let me know in the comments below. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Go ahead and check out my memberships if you're interested in helping support my channel. My Discord is linked below if you're interested in joining that. That is completely free. But that's going to do it. I will see you next time.